What if the history we've all been taught is, well, missing a massive puzzle piece? Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a truly fascinating manuscript called Sanabel, Redrawing Human History Through the Quran. Written by Abu Uzair ibn Yusuf al-Ridan, this text presents some absolutely profound historical, archaeological, and geopolitical claims that challenge the very foundation of how we view the ancient world. Today, we're going to give you a comprehensive report on this document. We'll be hitting the keynotes, exploring its contemporary relevance, and summarizing its incredibly bold proposal, the idea that to truly understand our present, we literally have to redraw our understanding of human history.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the modern Muslim crisis, introduce Sanabel as a solution, look at the Quran as a historical filter, check out some archaeological evidence regarding Prophet Yusuf, touch on ancient geopolitics, and then wrap up with a big synthesis of why this all matters.
All right, part one, the modern Muslim crisis, a collective struggle.
Let's dive right in. The author doesn't start in the ancient past. He starts right now, today, with a really stark look at the modern Muslim Ummah, the global community. He actually lists out 25 specific modern crises. And we're talking devastating numbers here, like over 37,000 casualties in Palestine and a staggering 40% poverty rate across OIC countries. But here's the thing. The author's main point is that these aren't just, random political or economic failures. No. He argues that all of this, along with severe drops in literacy and a massive, systemic identity crisis, stems from one single root cause. Basically, when a civilization loses its epistemological grounding, its core understanding of truth and history, the whole meaning of things just collapses inward. In other words, he says the Ummah has lost its active connection to the Quran as a real-world compass, which directly leads to the heavy toll we're seeing today.
Moving on to part two, introducing the Sanabel manuscript, the solution.
So, how do you fix a systemic collapse? Well, the text introduces a really bold intellectual remedy. That remedy is the manuscript itself, Sanabel. The core idea here is you absolutely cannot fix a modern crisis of identity and poverty with just a new economic policy. The author says the only real solution is a total, ground-up historical reevaluation. We have to redraw human history. And we do that by using the Quran not just as a book of theology, but as the ultimate historical and scientific guide. Because think about it, the history we believe shapes the reality we actually live in. The main goal of this book is to systematically strip away colonial myths and corrupted records to find the objective historical facts that can actually heal the modern mind.
Part 3. The Quran as a historical filter. The concept of Furqan.
Now, to pull off this massive rewriting of history, the manuscript lays out a very specific methodology. It sets up a sharp contrast. On one hand, the author looks at the biblical tradition and argues that over millennia, these historical texts went through tahrif. Basically, that means alteration, corruption, or hiding the facts. He specifically points to things like the Book of Esther as an example of text being molded by political ideology rather than, actual historical reality. But on the flip side, he presents the Quranic tradition as a Furqan. Furqan translates to the criterion, or the ultimate filter. Think of it like a high-definition historical magnifying glass. In this framework, the Quran is used as a strict, totally objective lens to evaluate archaeology, linguistics, and history. It's meant to filter out all that ideological noise and mythology so we can finally see the scientific truth underneath.
Okay, part 4, archaeological evidence, Prophet Yusuf, and realigning the timeline.
Let's look at a concrete case study from the book to see this high-definition filter in action. The author aligns Prophet Yusuf's time in Egypt with the era of the Hyksos. If you're not familiar, the Hyksos, which translates to shepherd kings, were Semitic rulers in Egypt during the Middle Bronze Age. And here is where the linguistics get just incredibly precise. The Quran specifically uses the title al-Malik, which means king, when talking about the ruler during Yusuf's time. It deliberately avoids the word pharaoh. The author points out that this perfectly matches the archaeological record, because the title pharaoh didn't even become standard until the New Kingdom, which was much later. So that very precise use of king fits the Semitic-oriented Hyksos administration like a glove.
And the archaeological records totally back this up. There are actual murals from this exact era depicting Semitic peoples in Egypt. And what's fascinating is that it shows them not as marginalized outcasts, but as people who smoothly assimilated right into the highest levels of the Egyptian administrative system. It creates this vivid historical backdrop that perfectly explains how someone like Prophet Yusuf could rise up to become a leading, highly respected statesman in a completely foreign land.
To really cement this, the author brings in what he calls smoking gun evidence, the Rhind mathematical papyrus. You can kind of think of the Rhind papyrus as a 3,500-year-old central banking spreadsheet. It's not just a simple math worksheet. The author analyzes it as absolute proof of a highly rational, centralized, ratio-based agricultural economy. It literally shows a civilization calculating the precise volume of granaries and the distribution of rations. And guess what? This system perfectly matches the exact administrative strategies Prophet Yusuf implemented for mass grain storage, the very strategies that famously saved the entire region from a devastating famine.
But here's where the math gets genuinely staggering. This ancient papyrus heavily features complex mathematical calculations centered around the number 7. The author argues, with a lot of enthusiasm I might add, that this is definitely no coincidence. That heavy reliance on the number 7 directly mirrors the Quranic narrative of the Egyptian king's dream. You know, the famous premonition about 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 thin cows and 7 green ears of grain. The manuscript essentially ties this physical, ancient administrative document directly to the divine wisdom and economic foresight of Yusuf. It argues that this wasn't just a nice story, it was actual historical economic policy.
Part 5. Ancient Geopolitics, Redefining the Map.
Now, a really crucial part of this report is how these historical realignments challenge modern geopolitical narratives. Based strictly on the author's analysis of archaeological and geographical data, the manuscript proposes 3 massive paradigm shifts. First, it argues that Canaan was historically just a regional Egyptian buffer state, operating under Egyptian administration rather than an independent promised land at the center of the world. Second, the text asserts that the exodus of Moses wasn't some huge spectacle with millions of people wandering aimlessly. Instead, it was a small, highly directed movement of a specific group which actually aligns much better with the physical archaeological footprint in the Sinai Peninsula. And finally, and this is perhaps the biggest one, the author emphasizes the Kaaba in Mecca as the true original center of monotheism. By stating it was constructed long before the prophets of the Levant, this fundamentally shifts the geopolitical center of ancient faith away from the Mediterranean right back to the Arabian Peninsula.
And finally, Part 6, Synthesis and Importance of Sanabal, the 4-part structure.
To wrap our heads around this vast amount of information, let's quickly look at how the author actually structures the book. The manuscript is brilliantly divided into 4 main pillars. It kicks off with Furqan, which focuses heavily on textual correction and critiquing altered histories. Then it flows seamlessly into science and nature, grounding the Quranic narratives in hard geology, geography, and archaeology. The third pillar dives deep into wisdom and metaphysics, looking at unseen sciences and hermeneutics. And finally, it brings the whole thing together in a synthesis. This final section offers a unified, Tawhidic view of history. What that means is looking at human history not as a bunch of random, fragmented events, but as one unified, divinely orchestrated narrative. This specific 4-part structure is designed to cure that modern crisis of meaning we talked about right at the beginning, by providing a robust, unshakable intellectual foundation.
The entire work is anchored by a really profound verse from Surah Yusuf. It essentially cements the author's core philosophy that history is a dynamic, living algorithm. These stories are actively meant to guide us. Just like the verse says, history is not some static record of the past or some forged, dusty fable. It is literally the ultimate lens through which we can understand the rise, the fall, and the actual mechanics of human civilizations today.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If history truly is a map, and the historical texts we rely on fundamentally shape our reality and our future, how will you apply this intellectual framework to your own life? How does shifting your historical perspective spark change in how you view the modern world right now? It's a lot to chew on, right? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer as we explored the incredible highlights and claims of the Sanabal manuscript. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.